Welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins, and today I'm joined by Dan White. You're very welcome to the podcast, Dan. Let's begin by asking you to maybe introduce yourself. Tell us all about the last 3 decades and this exciting journey that you're on, because if anybody knows about the wonderful world of marketing, it certainly is you. So over to you, Dan.
So you want me to talk you through 3 decades of my life story? Wow, this is only half an hour podcast, but no, I'll try and be succinct. Well, I'll start with where I am now. For the last 4 years, I've been writing, doing a lot of illustration work, and also marketing and market research, consulting and training. Quite a big portfolio of different things I've been involved in, and I've been lucky enough to work with lots of the big marketing organisations in the UK and the world. So that's been my focus. Before that, I did have 3 decades, predominantly, or 2/3 of it, focusing very much on market research and analytics. Advising people on their advertising and their brand building. But I became a chief marketing officer. So I got to see it from the other side, what it's like to actually be a practitioner of marketing rather than an advisor. So I learned a lot from that as well. And I've had various job titles over the years, including managing director for corporate development, which I never quite understood what that meant, but I did it for a couple of years. And my favourite one was head of expertise, and that was in Kantar in the UK, which I loved.
You don't come across many heads of expertise. That's an unusual one on me.
I like that one. I like that one. It was when I was moving more into the kind of training area and capability development, but also quite a lot of technical training about how marketing works and how market research tools work, etc. So it was a made-up role for me, which I quite liked for a couple of years as well.
And so obviously you've seen a lot, because all these different jobs and all these interesting job titles, but you worked in a very, I suppose, the company that you were involved in, very data heavy, very creative, big into strategy, and probably one of the best well-known in their field, I think, globally. I don't think I'm over-exaggerating there. So you must have seen an awful lot during that transition time. So maybe you could unpack that a little bit for us. But also, I'm very keen to go back to what you started with the things that you do now. So I want to come on to that as well, because if anybody's like me watching or listening to this episode, they may already be familiar with a lot of the great work that you're publishing at the moment. So let's take a little dive backwards into maybe some of that sort of global strategy, data, insights, creative work. And then let's bring it right up to date, because the stuff you're doing right now, I'm a big fan.
Oh, good. I'm glad you said that. I never get a lot of feedback. I mean, obviously, I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, and I suspect and hope my brand is building. And you can measure impressions and how they build and stuff like that, but you never know whether your message is getting out there and your content's getting out there. So it's nice to hear that. I guess going back then, I think I was lucky, very lucky, to work in a company. It was originally Millward Brown, and then that became part of Kantar. That generally was I think we were at the cutting edge of understanding how advertising works and how brands are built. So, and that's from, I started in 1990, I think I started at the company. And I worked with Gordon Brown, not the Prime Minister Gordon Brown, as I always have to say, but the co-founder of Millward Brown, on research techniques, building them, developing them, learning. And so I characterize my whole time with that company as learning with and for some huge companies. Like your United Distillers that became Diageo, and your Unilevers, and all these companies that were building brands and expanding globally and figuring out how to do this stuff. So I worked with all of the big. Well, we had a stat once. I can't remember what the stat was exactly, but something like we worked with 70 or 80% of the top 100 advertisers in the UK.
Yeah, no, I remember that time, and you were, if they were a big brand, they were probably working with you guys. Yeah.
Yes, And a lot of them were doing pre-testing. So I was very heavily involved in the development of what was called the link. It still is called the link pre-test. So that was big. And then after that, we kind of realized that, to really understand how advertising, you need to understand how brands work. I know it sounds almost like the wrong way around, but that's how the company evolved. So there was a lot of work in understanding what builds a brand, what makes a brand profitable, successful, resilient, etc., etc. So got focused on that, and that led to Brand Z, which you may have come across, which is a very well established measurement system. So I co-created that technology, if you like, that approach to measuring brand and quantifying its value. So that was all my background, and so it was great. It was working with all these fantastic big, really creative and intelligent and companies that had a lot of data to learn from. So that's always in my blood, the kind of analysis side.
Well, do you know what, Dan? That's great, and we will never be able to pack 30 years of experience into this short episode. But it is true to say that you were truly working with some of the biggest and well-known brands on the planet and doing some very interesting but also important work with those brands, which led on to great successes for lots of those brands. Really ended up contributing to their growth, both locally and internationally, and the story that they tell around the world. And I suppose that brings us nicely onto the book, the work you're doing now through illustration, really, as well, playing a big part. But tell me all about the book. Tell the international audience about smartmarketing.me and what's going on there, because I think it's wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, the origin of it. The origin is simple. I have told this story a few times, but for your audience, I'll tell it again, which is, in fact, I've got one here. Hang on. I know this isn't great for your audio listeners, but I'm now grabbing a typical A5 notepad. And my trusty propelling pencil, as they used to call them, my pencil. For years, I mean, you can see, look, they're just a random page. I just opened it, and on the screen, your viewers can see at least, like, I don't know, what's that? It's a graph. I'm trying to map out how I can't tell what this is. Oh, I know what this is. This is how exposure to the same creative each time that there's a diminishing return. Okay. Anyway, I've been building books like this to capture my thoughts and, well, not just my thoughts, but more importantly, the magpieing the thoughts of all these great people that I was lucky enough to work with. And I built up a whole pile of them, about 50, I think it was. It was approximately 50. And then when I left the corporate world to be a freelancer, and partly driven by my wife saying, can we get rid of this massive pile of books? And I said, well, not until I've captured them all. So that led to the first book, which is, okay, what have I learned that might be relevant? And more importantly, there's an even worse one here. Look at that. I don't know what that is. Anyway, development in major markets, whatever. But to try and make sense of those and actually make them legible and useful for communicating what I think are important marketing concepts. And that's kind of what I think I do now. That's my main role, is to capture important marketing concepts in a way that's very visual and very intuitive for people who to understand complex things easily. That's my job.
Yeah, and I think the diagrams, because you post a lot of these on social media, don't you?
I do.
And I see a lot of them on the LinkedIn platform, for example. And I think they're not something you can just look at within a second and grasp it. You know, it takes a few seconds. You got to sort of quickly figure out what's going on here, but then it just hits you. And I think the message comes through succinctly, and you get this huge learning within a few seconds of just being able to study the diagram or the illustration that's there. And I think they're not just inspirational and helpful, but I think they are very thoughtful and very educational, particularly for those people that are involved in anything to do with storytelling, building a brand, cutting through the noise that's out there. And I think in a world of AI, to see these wonderful illustrations coming to life, I think it's a real testament to those notebooks that you've got squirreled away somewhere. I'm looking around. I'm looking around here as we're recording. I've got 3 A5 notebooks
Have
just
you?
strewn across the desk, and I know where my stack of notebooks are. And it's quite funny like that, because they're kind of the things that you can't throw away, and yet nobody wants them just taking up bookshelf space. Or
Well, no,
no,
I did manage to throw them away once I've
yeah,
captured them. You know, it's like therapy. It's like I can now because they've been published either on LinkedIn or in the
very
book.
good,
Yeah.
very
So
good.
yeah, but that is the whole idea. I mean, some of the diagrams I do, even the simple ones, they've taken an incredible amount of time to distill. And I go through sometimes 4 or 5 iterations, and I keep thinking, oh, that's still too complex, or that doesn't make the point, or that. So they are a lot of thought goes into those um, to do what I'm glad you've noticed, which is so that
Yeah,
spend a few seconds trying to understand them, and you should be able to understand them. That's otherwise I failed. You will hopefully understand and be able to remember something, especially if you're like me with a kind of very visual focus, and you tend to think about things in a visual way or remember things in a visual way. So that's kind of who I'm catering for, and partly because I'm not going to point to any particular book behind me, but I find it very hard to sit down and read a 120,000 word business book that doesn't have any pictures. I'd rather read a comic or something. I just can't do it. It's not in my nature. I read a lot, but I don't read it in that way. Um,
I think you're right, and I think part of it is because people that, not everybody, but a lot of people that are in this area of work, ultimately, when you dig down below the surface, they're creative type people. They like to create. They like things that inspire and delight and educate. And I think ultimately, if it's just text constantly, you kind of tune in and out a bit.
it's
And
heavy,
those
isn't it?
are,
I mean, it's hard work, just to.
yeah. But the thing with the illustration is, it reminds me, one of the people we've had on the show is a very famous, globally famous cartoonist who, the New Yorker, the New York Times, and they write those sort of, they draw and illustrate those cartoons. And she's just back from doing the Oscars, for example, where she's been,
Yeah.
backstage for many, many years. She's invited back every year to do the sketches of the Oscars. But in her political cartoons, for example, being able to distill what's going on in, say, a global issue or incident, and then turn it into humor with a
Mm.
wry twist or a little wink of the eye, and tell it in just a visual quickly within a few seconds. It reminded me, when you were talking about that illustration that you're putting out there, probably represents months and months of client work, months and months of deep diving, months and months of studies and working with people. And maybe others, they're not, they happened a lot quicker than that. But it's all the work that's been distilled into this output, isn't it?
Yes. No, I definitely feel that. There's a lovely quote, and I'm not comparing myself with Dali, right, to the painter, but there was just something he famously designed. The Chopper Chops lolly logo, and not just the logo, but also the way it sits on top of the suite. Instead. Um, and according to anecdote, it just took him a few minutes. He literally just sat down and did it, and obviously he charged a healthy amount of money. And it's like, well, am I paying you for 10 minutes? No, you're not. You're paying me for 30 years. And I quite like that quote because it kind of reminds you that if people really know what they're doing, they are able to do that. Like the cartoonist you just mentioned, they can distill it because they have a skill that other people haven't, and they built it. It's not like they didn't do that when they were 19 years old. They got better and better and better and faster. And I just think that's a fascinating way of thinking. You're paying for experience as well.
Yeah. And with that experience, you bring me on to something else that I'd like to ask you,
Mm.
Dan. So obviously that's kind of the passion now, and where a lot of your attention is diverted. Are you still doing the consulting work? Are you still working with brands?
Yeah,
And what does it look like for you now, on sort of like your work schedule, if I can use that term?
yeah, I am. It's a big mix, and I kind of have always felt that. In fact, right through my career, I was doing quite a lot of at Kantar, I was doing a lot of product development, as in developing new research or analytical approaches. Yeah, but I wasn't in the what was called the global R&D team or whatever. I always had 50% of my time working directly with clients because that's what gave me inspiration and the opportunity to talk through things and test out things with people who are going to use them. And I've never stopped that. So I've always had the 50, well, roughly 50-50 balance. So yeah, so I do spend at least half my time either training. So I work with, I can say who I work with. I'm just trying to check it. I'm trying to remember my NDAs. I don't want to, yeah, I can mention I'm working with Dr. Oetker, who make, the bakery products and Ristorante Pizza and lots of other frozen pizzas and stuff like that. So that's one of my kind of loyal clients that I love working with. So I'm doing their kind of global marketing training ongoing. And I also work with, well, other clients as well, but I also work with the MRS, delivering some of their training, the Market Research Society in the UK. Training I like because you tend to get fresh, younger people with new ideas who will ask incredible questions that make you think, especially if they've experienced the world differently from a 54-year-old sort of thing. And that keeps me thinking. So I do a lot of training as well. I worked at one point with this was my most, I love this project because it really stretched me, which was a company who develops software for quantum computers that don't really fully exist yet, helping them figure out how to market themselves. And so it's like, whoa, that's really interesting. You're marketing yourself about the promise of something that may or may not become truly valuable. It could be 2 years, could be 20 years. That's really hard. But yeah, I always will work consultancy and training as long as people want me, as well as the other stuff, which I still think of it as a hobby. My illustrations and my books and things and my LinkedIn stuff. It's still
it's funny how we position that mentally, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned quantum computing, and we're in the world of AI today. But quantum computing, I'm sure then you've been down the rabbit hole of what quantum computing is and managing qubits and how that works and what companies are actually making some small progress, and whether it will ever happen or not. That's a whole other world. But it brings me nicely onto something I want to ask you, because with all your experience, we're all constantly learning, and you said you like the training side because it brings fresh ideas. So how do you onboard information as well as the training? What's your own learning style? We know you like illustrations and not just text and text and text, but are you constantly scouring social media? Are you talking to people on a one-on-one basis? Are you reading books? I mean, is it YouTube videos? What do you do in today's world, Dan, that helps you stay with your finger on the pulse?
It's a big mixture. Like I mentioned before, I'm a big fan of LinkedIn. I find it incredibly useful for inspiration, and also because the format of it is the post. There are articles, but even the articles are short. So you get snippets and you get ideas and perspectives. And I know not all of it's great, but you will quite quickly come across some brilliant people with some brilliant content. And so that's one mechanism. But the way I've always learned is working with another person, talking them through my ideas or asking them about their ideas. So that one-to-one. So, and again, that's why I like LinkedIn, because the community is very open. Quite a few times I've contacted someone who's written something I found fascinating and said, look, you don't know me, but I'm really interested in what you do. Could you spare me 20 minutes for a Zoom call or even just a dialogue on the chat? And mostly they will. Not everyone, but mostly they will. And I tend to, and as long as you return the favor, it's like, okay, you've done me a favor, I owe you one. And then you build a network of people who help, but also you learn from, and hopefully they learn a bit from you. And so that's exactly what I used to do with clients and colleagues when I was in the corporate world. So it's for me, an idea, I can't formulate an idea without bouncing it. What's the phrase? Bouncing around with someone.
Yeah, that sounding board is important, isn't it? When
Yeah,
you're
just
trying to form.
ask my children, my wife, and they'll tell you this is definitely true. In fact, just a quick build. My son is he's 28 now, and he's got a PhD, and he's like twice as intelligent as me. But he is the editor of all of these books. But at an early stage, before it even got to the publisher for editing, he's my editor, and he says that makes no sense. Or what do you mean by this? And I say it, and he goes, well, that makes no sense. Try again. So again, I do tend to leverage everyone around me to help me with my.
Well, Dan, for our audience, because I've seen the books, and I think they're really, really good, and I'm not just saying that. So maybe you could hold them up, and for our audio audience as well, maybe tell us a little bit about each of the titles, because they're sort of, you could get them as a series, but they all have individual sort of areas of expertise. Now, just maybe talk us through that for a second, if you don't mind.
No, that's fine. It's a good advert. So yeah, that's absolutely fine. The first one was the Smart Marketing book, and it's a broad brush introduction to all aspects of marketing. So it's marketing in its broadest definition, as in should be have a say in innovation, product innovation. It should have a say in how customer service works. And of course, it should lead the communications and PR activity around your brand. So it's a real crash course in all kind of things, and it touches on everything. But obviously, it can't go into a lot of detail because it covers everything. And that led me to do a much more detailed book about one of the areas I know a bit more about, which is branding. Or it says branding. I mean branding in its broader sense, brand building. What you need to do to build a brand that becomes valuable and successful and profitable and resilient. So that's that one. Now the logical third one hasn't been published yet. It's coming out next year, early next year, which will be kind of the smart advertising book. So you've got marketing in its overall, then you've got the kind of brand side, and then next to it will be the and it'll look like this one. The advertising. So that's about the kind of practice of creating content and deploying it in a sensible way across different touch points in media. Now the fourth one, which is already out, it's a bit of an aside. Okay, it's called the Soft Skills book, and it's about building your personal effectiveness. It's about your communication skills and styles, and also about kind of useful practices, like how to run an effective meeting, how to go about running a project if you've never run a big project for the first time. How do you do it? So it's all the things you need to be successful in many careers, but particularly, the career I know, so it's market research and marketing. To be successful, you need a blend of what I call the technical skills and the interpersonal communication skills, the soft skills, because you need both. And I don't know which is more important. Apparently, soft skills are becoming more important than technical skills, because technical skills are more easily replicated through AI, etc. Soft skills are quite a lot harder for computers, I would say.
So there's three books highly recommended to anybody in this brand building, complex marketing world that we're in today. I know from a post that I saw of you proudly displaying them in W.H. Smith's in Heathrow Airport.
I found all three of them. I found all three of them in one shop. It's the first time, so it's like an eclipse or something, whatever it's called.
They're available on all the large book online retailers, Amazon, etc. That people can find them. But there are some real gems of information there. So thank you for sharing that with our audience today. And I suppose it brings me on to something I'd like to ask our guests to do, which is to share some advice, because obviously you're writing books. You have a superb career expertise behind you, and the work that you're doing now with big brands still helping companies today. But when you were starting off, maybe were the people that helped you along the way? Was there some good advice that you picked up that you'd like to share with us? Or maybe it's something that you've published in one of your books where you think, look, this is really valuable and your viewership should know these things.
Well, I did the things that I kind of wish I knew earlier in my career, kind of stuff. It does relate actually to the soft skills book, because those are the things I tried to capture there. The things that I wish I'd known that when I was 20 or 25, or when I started this job or took on this responsibility. And I know something about when I wrote this book. One of the chapters early on is about listening skills. It's a section, it's I can't find it quickly enough for you, but it's early on because it's really important about how you interact with others. And I noticed I back referred to that chapter more than any other chapter by far throughout the rest of the book. So when I'm talking about pitching for new business, or working with clients, engaging with clients, listening skills were always going to be one of the most important things. So I'll go back to, if you haven't already read it, as I discussed in section whatever 1.2 whatever, and it was quite a revelation when I realized I was not as good a listener as I thought, and that and more importantly that active listening, or however you describe it, is the single most important thing for being personally effective, in my opinion. Astoundingly important, and not just for professional life but for your personal life as well. So it's like, okay, if there's one thing, and that's, I bore people with this, one thing you need to know is you need to be a good listener and know how to do it if you want to succeed. So yeah, I would say that.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Totally agreed. Like that a lot, Dan.
Cool.
So look, I don't want to run out of time, and I do want to squeeze in some more questions. The next 6, 12, 18 months, what does it look like for you? What are you working on? Obviously, you've got the 4th book coming out.
Yeah.
But how are you planning these days? What's on your own horizon? What's it look like for you?
You know what? I have no idea. I've never really planned my career, and I know a lot of people say you should, but I've always kind of gone with my gut a little bit. I've kind of gone with the flow. Or have you read the book or seen the film Yes Man? I think it was Jim Carrey.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know the one. Yeah.
Yeah, and the book was written by a Brit, Danny Wallace. That's it. And that book struck me. I just love that book. And film. It's just the idea that just for a stretch of time, you have to say yes to everything. You have to say yes and do whatever. And I kind of like that, because it's like, if you say yes, you will open up opportunities. And you don't know where they'll take you, and sometimes they won't take you somewhere useful, but quite often they do. So I try, unless I got a good reason not to, I tend to say yes to things and see where that leads me. So the next 6 months, 12 months, I don't know for sure, but I've got a few interesting things happening. I'm doing some work with Dentsu at the moment, which could lead to something quite exciting. Again, I really can't say more, because I think this one is a little bit more sensitive. But broadly, they did a massive project called the Attention Economy, and it was related to Karen Nuttallfield's work in the same area, etc. It's the next wave of that, so that will be quite exciting. So that's definitely
that sounds very exciting.
That's probably the one I'm most
yeah. So a combination of that and following in Danny Wallace type footsteps.
Yeah, and see what happens. And the ones I love to do, and I wish I got more of these gigs, but illustration work, because it almost doesn't matter. It's like it doesn't even have to be in the area of marketing. In fact, I am working with someone on like how to not play the stock market, but how to succeed with stocks and shares, and this guy's got these amazing ideas about how to do it, and I'm hopefully going to help illustrate that. So I love the challenge of give me a complex topic and I'll try and make it comprehensible for everyone. So, but obviously that's not. I'm best well known for marketing expertise, so that's a bit of an aside. But like you say, it's something I really enjoy.
Well, look, from quantum computing to making the stock market more understandable, I think they've got the right man for the job. That's for sure, Dan. Well, look, finally, is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you'd like to cover, or maybe something we have covered that you want to double down on? And secondly, and importantly, if people want to reach out and connect with you, if they want to, get their hands on the books, where are you sending people to these days, Dan?
I tend to send people to my website, which is smartmarketing.me. So not .com or anything like that, or .co.uk. Smartmarketing.me. I keep pretty much every illustration, not everyone, but the ones that are worth publishing, and they overlap with what goes into the books. So it's like a record. So I do like, and obviously through that you can get in touch with me, and I'm quite happy for people to email me directly on dan.j.white@me.com, which is nice. You sound a bit egocentric. I like the addresses with me in it, obviously. Yeah, just so feel free to do that. But is there anything else I'd like to go? Not especially. As you can probably tell, I'm interested in lots of different things, so I don't tend to.
Well, look, it would be. Seeing as how we touched on quantum computing, it wouldn't be right of me to wrap up unless we touch on the topic that everybody's talking about, which is AI. And with your marketing expertise, just a quick viewpoint on where you think marketing helps, hinders, or benefits us from a global marketing perspective.
Well, I think it's going to hit creative in a big way, creative development massively, no question about it. True originality will still need to be paid for. It'll still be worth brands paying someone who comes up with something that's not come up with before. The whole point of AI is it can't, at the moment anyway, it's not that good at coming up with something that's never been come up with before. Although that's arguable, actually, and you could say that, well, all art is theft, etc., etc. But I think that it will have a big impact, in terms of execution of high quality things that is done by kind of average creatives, let's say, around the world. That's going to be wrapped up quite quickly with AI and shifting jobs and fewer jobs and all that, no question. The strategic side, I mean, it's interesting because when I, obviously, for like we all do these days, when I'm exploring a topic, I go into ChatGPT and I see what it has to say about it. And it tends to summarize beautifully what the current kind of consensus is around a topic. But in the world of marketing, quite a lot of that stuff is kind of wrong or outdated or been disproven by academia. So it's not that helpful. In fact, it's useful to know what current conceptions are and whether that some of which may be misconceptions, because then you can focus on how to communicate the newer thinking or the better thinking or the more proven thinking. So that's kind of how I use it. But who knows? It's so hard to know how that will evolve, and there may be a way of using AI to say what's the latest, best proven thinking. Tell me that, not just what everyone says. In which case, it'll threaten what I do. I like to. I mean, I've been talking to a few people. I say, my drawings will take longer to be overtaken by AI because they are crafted, if you like, human crafted things, and hopefully original. Although someone told me the other day that one of the things I drew, I'd actually come across in 1994 when I was at Millward Brown, and I literally had forgotten. Well, I don't know. The brain is, you collect stuff, like, don't you, from all over the place. I had forgotten that was. So, I plagiarized my old boss without even remembering it because it was 30 years ago. Sorry, that was a really waffly answer to your question. Has it sort of answered it or not?
Well, I think waffly is a great term when we're talking about AI, because AI is the great savior, the great challenge, and everything in between. So we will see where we end up. Yes. But look, it does bring us nicely to the end of our discussion today with Dan White. So thanks to Dan. Thanks to everybody who's watching or listening to this episode around the world. Make sure that you like, follow, subscribe, do everything I need you to do to help support the show. And of course, go and check out everything Dan's doing on his website, check out his books, and make sure that you join me back here for some more conversations with leading creatives and leaders and thinkers like Dan. But thank you, Dan. It's been wonderful to have you on the show today. It's been a pleasure.
You're welcome. Thanks for inviting me.